Many Overwatch 1 veterans are considering Marvel Rivals to be the true sequel to Overwatch 1, especially with Overwatch 2 making so many controversial decisions with the hero shooter genre. Marvel Rivals stands an opportunity to compete as a very distinctly different hero shooter game. I think that question is a little bit up for debate, seeing as I covered Overwatch 1 from day one. I witnessed it take a series of transformations. So depending on what time period you emphasize from Overwatch 1's life, you're gonna have a completely different take on what it was or what it should be identified as anyway. But luckily, Marvel Rivals gets to have the opportunity to learn from the decisions from the Overwatch 1 development, how to handle imbalances in the game, disruptive new character additions. Does the game need a role queue? We'll talk about a lot of this from a macro point of view, but first, I want to get down to the basics of Marvel Rivals and just say, I find the game very fun. As with any hero shooter game, as long as there's hero mechanics that I enjoy contributing to team fights with, I'm gonna have a good time. And since so many of the Marvel Rivals heroes are amalgamations of concepts that were already in Overwatch, I found it very easy to find characters that I could succeed with. And a lot of principles and skill sets that I learned from years of playing Overwatch carry directly over. Whether it was regrouping with my team, managing cooldowns, setting tempo in fights, the principles of team shooting, committing ultimates on checkpoints, etc, etc, etc. Any Overwatch fan that likes those aspects of the game is going to enjoy Marvel Rivals. But I also think Rivals can and does distinguish itself as a unique entity in the hero shooter genre for a variety of reasons. The time to kill in general is long, and the move speed of characters is low, other than their movement abilities, which are even wackier perhaps than Overwatch movement in some cases. Importantly, the base movement is quite slow, which means tracking an individual target that's moving normally is quite easy. So landing your abilities and attacks is somewhat satisfying and user-friendly that just about any gamer should be able to enter the base point of the game. While there are high skill floor characters, in general, Marvel Rivals feels a bit more approachable than even early versions of Overwatch did. Whereas in Overwatch, you tend to need to have certain easier character mechanics to let a friend join your group and play. Especially in Overwatch 2, there is no such thing as an easy tank, so get that right out of the way. And because the game is so competitive, even sticking them on Moira, Mercy, or Lifeweaver might still really hold back your team's performance. Whereas in Marvel Rivals, as long as you regroup with your team, you might not notice how punishing it is until you start to get into more competitive forms of matchmaking. Little mistakes definitely do add up and snowball, and you can get destroyed in this game, don't get me wrong. But an important distinction between the two games is Marvel Rivals is a brawly hero shooter with way more abilities in it overall, with an extra character in comparison to Overwatch 2, but also just more abilities per character as far as I can count. Less emphasis on the gunplay, as a lot of it is the same, which I'll also levy as a criticism later in the video, because so much of the shooting mechanics is either spammy or melees. You just don't have to be that skilled necessarily to jump into it. Then on top of it, I would say something that really got thinned out over time and something that the Overwatch developers are trying to actually improve in a way and reintroduce into the game is the discovery and expression of wacky team comps, especially when you consider the strength of the team up mechanics, which essentially either gives passive buffs or entirely new extra abilities to certain characters. That would be one of my top arguments against role queue for this game, because especially down the line as they keep adding characters, you're going to be able to make more unique team comps that are somewhat viable or at least interesting to try out, regardless of their competitive viability, just to see the heroes offer new gameplay experiences. And what I don't think this game would want is to funnel everybody into some pre-described role format and not be able to flexibly move throughout the roster to create and take advantage of those team up mechanics. I'm also going to later say that's the main reason why we should never expect this game to be nearly as competitively balanced as Overwatch is. You could describe that as a weakness later on, but I think the best course of action for both games is for them to hollow out the best version of themselves and play to their strengths, as opposed to trying to appease everybody at the same time. Even from a competitive point of view, you'd much rather have a type of format that makes you wonder, could we get Squirrel Girl to be a top tier pick, seeing as she gains an extra CC ability so that she is a personal CC stack machine when she's paired up with Spider-Man, who also isn't considered a top pick at the moment? But if I can theorize, well, you could go for a single tank, max dive, glass cannon style comp with a solo tank of Venom, Spider-Man following him from above, Squirrel Girl who can punish any frontline aggression with her 2 forms of CC, and spam from afar. This is similar to a comp that we saw in Overwatch. The comp that eventually defeated the GOATS comp so many years ago with Wrecking Ball, Pharah in the Sky, and multi-DPS. While yes, it is easier to play around a good tank player and perhaps even easier still to play around 2 tanks synergizing together, I urge this community to allow this game to take advantage of its strengths rather than avoid the negative gameplay experiences of the weakness of potentially making a terrible comp, which of course will happen. The downsides to matchmaking queue time, as well as to the creativity of the game, are simply not worth it, especially when it seems like they're going to be adding a lot of characters to this game over time. I've mostly played tank and support myself, and I have adored the gameplay that I've gotten. The tank characters are incredibly durable with a lot of optionality and satisfying mechanics and plays. Whether it's the target priority of knowing who to bubble and when as Magneto, setting up a massive dive into the backline, corralling the enemy and then setting them up for a huge ultimate as Venom, or defending myself with disable abilities as a support character, coming in to save the day with a support ultimate to heal my team and thwart the efforts of especially the solo-minded players on the enemy team. Understanding team play fundamentals goes a long way in Marvel Rivals, and especially as you don't necessarily need stellar aim mechanics to play a lot of the characters, you're really going to shine as a player if you really understand the fundamentals of team play. And then even more so, one step further, it reminds of the days of Overwatch 1 open queue, where because you can swap roles as well, having great meta knowledge or matchup knowledge can go a long way if you're interested in counter-picking your way to victory. Sorry, that's a trigger word for Overwatch players in Overwatch 2, but counter-picking in this game is very, very good. As in, certain heroes auto-delete other heroes. And while I think, based on what I've viewed on the discussion front of this game, I think a lot of players are really poor at making big, sweeping generalizations about the state of the meta, the balance, the competitive heroes, etc., especially since the gameplay is really low at the moment. It's the lowest it's ever going to be for this game. As in, the community is going to get much better at the fundamentals, and a lot of characters look a lot more viable than they actually are when the enemy's making clear and obvious mistakes that you probably will expect them to learn out either over time or as you get higher in rank. We did notice this to be a phenomenon that happened in Overwatch's life as well. There's certain mechanics that are going to hard catch you out, but as soon as you realize what the clear and obvious and more importantly, easy solutions to those things are, they're going to fall off over time. In Overwatch 1, a character like Bastion dominated the average player, okay? But over the course of maybe months, it was hardly a threat for the hardcore player base. There's a lot of characters that I think qualify as that pub stomper in Marvel Rivals right now, and I actually think it makes the game look a lot more diverse than it's going to be down the line when the meta is kind of more understood. But honestly, I think keeping the game unbalanced, which is something I've sort of begged for in Overwatch and was shouted down over the course of years, is a better decision, because alternatively, if everything is tried to be as balanced as possible, which is what we have in Overwatch 2, specialization kind of goes away a bit, and more players are going to actively be counter-swapping, even to just get a 1% to 2% advantage in a matchup, whereas the sloppiness of the hero roster right now is a bit of an advantage because there's more texture to how things interact. The worst thing for this game, I think, would be to try to stare at what the highest tier competitive players are doing and base the balance of the game off of that. I'll explain that more when I talk about the cons of the game, but we'll just draw a line in the sand for now at least. Keep the game fun and wacky. Do not balance the fun out of this game, please. Because ultimately, I think this game has a wealth of growth potential. Marvel is huge. There's lots of characters that you can pull from. There was a whole bunch that were in this game that I got introduced to for the first time. I'm over here Googling and looking up content about Squirrel Girl or Luna Snow, who I never had heard of before. So not only does Marvel have a back catalog of infinite characters to add, basically, they come in with their own lore and ways to develop into the Marvel universe as a fan, watching their movies or reading the comics. That's a major advantage, meaning that so much of the ideation process has already been done for this dev team, and then anything else they just copied from Overwatch anyway. So when it comes to like the character kits and how the abilities work, well, all they got to do is kind of walk forward with this strategy, and this is going to be a game that's going to have a wealth of content for it as years go on.
But you should know magnetism doesn't work on super cooled materials. Guess what I can do?
Be impertinent, it seems.
There is great chaos in you, woman. Chaos and darkness.
You're one to talk, Venom.
It was not an insult. We find it strangely attractive.
Somehow you just made me want to save the universe.
A few more positives I want to add into the pros section of the video. It's a pretty polished game. While the optimization can be a bit sus overall, it looks decent, it runs decent, the menus are responsive, and it feels good to play. On the whole, ultimately, I'm going to say I don't think it's as good as Overwatch, but it's good enough for what it is. The biggest strength, I would say, is the complexity of the characters. They've all got a lot of buttons to push, ways to contribute, and therefore the team comp interactions are diverse. I do think they'll get more hollowed out over time because competitive players tend to veer more towards winning easy rather than experimentation and fun, which is another reason why I think the devs shouldn't go crazy trying to appease the competitive crowd, because the experimentation and fun is, I think, the biggest selling point of Marvel Rivals. Which now, okay, get into the cons. The flip side of that, of course, is that I am entirely confident that this game is not well balanced, and I think most players don't seem to realize that. Whenever I watch tier lists, I see a lot of characters that seem comparable, and I don't believe it for a second. There's only so many jobs that need doing, and the potential for degenerate strategies that easily walk over others is insane with this kind of open queue 6v6 format. I think there's quite a few characters right now that are actually underpowered without their team up abilities. Characters that I wish I could play, like Captain America or Storm, really need that extra bit of juice to be comparable to their like-minded counterparts. And what I think is going to be potentially even more toxic to this game is not begging your teammates to play two tanks and form a 2-2-2 composition, which isn't always the best anyway. More so if you get teammates that play weaker characters for that given patch that kind of need their team up just to make them somewhat competitive to probably the meta characters the enemy might be running. Luckily, the competitive scene already has hero bans at the top tier of play, which I think is required to ease off the pressure of anything OP from dominating that tier of play. Allow format to do the heavy lifting rather than expecting balance to fix anything, because balance will only pass the buck along to whatever BS thing creeps up as being the best. I urge the player base of this game to try to be open-minded to the different types of strategies you learn how to play, because while yes, we did feel like we needed role queue in Overwatch 1, it also was a game that required you to hold hands through a choke. Marvel Rivals is not like that. Instead, there's certain team comps that maybe want to fully emphasize poking, mobility and flanking, frontline brawling. Do you excel in the neutral fight? Do you excel in the ult fight? There's a lot of interesting decisions to be made, and I want to stress that it'll be best to allow the community to learn those things over time rather than shave down the sharp edges of the bad experiences, because that's something that Overwatch did over the course of many years, trying to make niche heroes more generally viable and trying to just make the game easier to play, which in some ways was good and in other ways didn't really even accomplish the goal. So in general, I think the competitive scene for this game is a little silly. Should not be an area of focus whatsoever, because we're going to expect the gaps in hero performance to be quite variable. Then on top of it, the certain team ups are probably going to be radically different, because when you start adding extra abilities to characters, how could it not? And then I think this becomes even more obvious as you scale up the ranks of gameplay, that the visual clutter in this game can kind of get out of control for a lot of reasons, because it's 6v6, but also just how many abilities the characters have. There's a lot of sustain, so a lot of rotations of abilities coming through, and then all of a sudden big ultimates. As an esport, the spectating experience, not so great. This was a major area of focus for Overwatch. Ignore this entirely. Who cares? Because while the downside is when everyone's coordinating together in full 6v6, it gets nuts. And another downside might be that staggering as a random teammate is super detrimental to your team. One or two players on your team not fighting or syncing together will make the game feel unplayable for the rest of your team. So what? This is a teamwork game. And if you decide to throw by fighting out of sync in a game where you're not really designed to carry as an individual on basically any hero, even a damage, you're just gonna have to write off those games as losses. Especially going from playing Overwatch 2, a game that even allows the support characters to have damage focused picks that can carry, or the tank role has half of its cast ignore their team entirely just so they can individually carry. Rivals is not like this at all. And certainly those long, complex team fights were a thing a lot of Overwatch players missed. And especially in the middle years of Overwatch 1, that's something Blizzard kind of deliberately went away from, especially with Jeff saying things like, well, they originally designed the game to be maximizing team play, and then somewhere in the middle of Overwatch 1's development, they geared it more towards solo play, with it eventually going to 5v5 and far more arena shooter than hero shooter. Well, Marvel, with its slower paced combat, both in movement and time to kill, has the benefit of committing to that teamwork gameplay, for better and worse. If there's any Valorant players signing up to play Marvel Rivals whining that they can't headshot their way to victory, we're going to show them the door. Okay, next con that I will nitpick about Marvel Rivals. I think there's two words I want to say that it feels samey. Whether it's the impact of your attacks, the sound effects, the responsiveness of the controls, the movement, I think Overwatch is a league above in a lot of these respects. Whereas I go from one character to another in Overwatch, I get an entirely new experience and I'm immersed into that character. Marvel Rivals has a few archetypes of characters or ability sets with different variations, and the uniqueness isn't quite there from a gameplay point of view, even though they're entirely different characters in the Marvel universe, supposedly. A lot of it is rehashed from Overwatch, but also just repetitive in the game itself. Sure, there's technically different animations from one melee attack to another. A lot of the projectiles feel entirely the same to me, with only a few key exceptions. I adore the way Magneto's big, powerful attacks feel, but whether I'm spamming down a lane with Mantis or Luna Snow, or I'm shooting projectiles with Iron Man or Squirrel Girl, like a lot of them are just about entirely the same, plus or minus a few sound effects and visual effects. While Blizzard might not be industry standard anymore for the Blizzard polish it was known for back in the day, they are trying their best nowadays. So despite Marvel having a wealth of history to work off of, there isn't quite the charm and immersion into any given character like I remember experiencing with Overwatch, where the subtleties of even just how they move and their mechanics all are expressive of who they are. That's attempted in Marvel Rivals, but just not as good, which is strange because you think being in third person would mean the opportunities for the animations of the characters should make this a major benefit. I think the potential is insane, and maybe it's something that they could even improve over time as they add characters in. It just seems like they kind of copied their notes on a lot of these characters in order to get up to 33 characters to release at launch in both these areas, whether it's the fighting mechanics or the animations and immersion into the character. I would even put it behind a game like Valorant. A small addition, because I decided to use Luna Snow gameplay for this section, I would say I think she has among the best hero identity of any of the characters I've played so far, which made even more sense when I researched the character, as she was a hero created during the boom of K-pop. So she does ooze that personality and is constantly dancing with her attacks. The only problem is other characters kind of flex and move in somewhat similar ways when they're shooting. So while this is the best version, a watermark, let's say, of the entire game roster so far, compare it to how Mantis or Cloak shoots from the same support role when they don't have that extra flavor of K-pop to work with, then you just start to get like the copy-paste-ness of it, where there's vague Marvel female ranged character 1, 2, 3, and 4. And I think it's even worse when you compare the personality of a lot of the melee characters, whether they're punching, slashing, whatever. It's like hard to differentiate what makes them unique as they do their attacks in combat. other than the visual flair surrounding them. That's important to me as an Overwatch player because the attitude and values and character identity is so infused with any given Overwatch character. Even the way Mercy pulls out her pistol to shoot things is different than, say, Kiriko. And that would be because Blizzard's art team, historically and presently, is just a better video game developer at those things. And yes, I realize this is a very aesthetic point of view, but when you spend thousands of hours in a game, or when you start to get excited for a new character, let's say, if the next female added to the cast just reminds me of the last 5, it's hard to get as excited as I say did for Hazard when he came out, where even though his gameplay is rehashed, a lot of his animations feel unique and personalized to who he is. Some of these are better than others, like Spider-Man, obviously web slings like we expect Spider-Man to, but when it comes to the combat mechanics, there was clearly some shortcuts made. One step further, let's talk about the skins in the game. I think some of them are pretty elite tier, but a bunch of them are meh. Partially because the base skin of most of the characters are pretty good. But I think it's a little bit lame that I had to pay a normal full price skin just to get Magneto to look somewhat purple and still not really look like his traditional version. They're capitalizing on Wolverine's skin from the Deadpool movie, which really is just a classic version, which is kind of the joke of the movie anyway. To me, that's what he always looked like when I was growing up as a kid. I don't know. I would put the skins in the game thus far as room to improve. If we kind of rank all of the different hero shooters that exist right now, Valorant's just got gun skins. Overwatch has had years of time now to increase their rate of development and the number of cosmetics that they have. That's one area that I think Overwatch is more developed than Marvel Rivals for sure. Especially when I say there's a lot of Battle Pass skins in Overwatch that I enjoy using. I don't think there's one out of the Battle Pass so far in Marvel Rivals that I would be excited to use. And that kind of matters to me when there's not so much content in the game. I like the idea of funding the game's development by flaring up my characters and expressing the things that I like them to look like. I just want to see less recolors and more inventive style skins. I thought it was pretty badass that Storm's skin comes with electric guitar sound effects. More stuff like that. Because even that, I thought, was underplayed from what it could be. But certainly, we wouldn't have wanted them to prioritize this aspect of the game over the gameplay feel and complexity and whatnot. So, not a huge problem. Perhaps even better that this is the con rather than over-exploitative monetization, which would have been a much bigger downside, of course. Also, in my experience, the voice chat wasn't really working for some reason, half the time, if not more. Kind of important considering I like to call dives with my teammates. I'm sure that's something that'll get patched though. Overall, I would have to say that I didn't experience any server crashes, which is kind of insane when you consider how many players are playing this game, and it seems to be cross-platform as far as I can tell. I saw logos for some of the consoles in some of my quick play matches, which has to be seen as a major benefit in that regard. All right, guys, that's everything for my review of Marvel Rivals. Overall, a lot of really good things to say. A fun game to sink my teeth into with a lot of meta complexity. I want to make quite a lot more videos on this game, as well as covering Overwatch 2 alongside it. So if you think that's a good idea, let us know in the comment section down below, and as well, give this video a like. Share it around, because the better this video performs, the more I will put effort into making cool content for this game as well. Hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you did, leave it a like, and don't forget to hit subscribe and the bell icon to actually get notified when our videos come out. That's been it for me. I've been Frito for your Overwatch. I'll see you guys next time.